I needed some time for myself, away from the city, work, everything. The choice of an Airbnb by a lake seemed perfect. An isolated cabin surrounded by tall trees with the promise of absolute silence and a breathtaking view. It was exactly what I needed. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The cabin was charming, a bit old but cozy. A large wooden porch extended out to a spectacular view of the lake, its waters reflecting the colorful sky. My thoughts of stress and anxiety began to fade the moment I stepped inside. The first night was peaceful. I had a glass of wine, enjoyed the silence, and soaked in the tranquility. The cabin had a rustic charm, with wooden furniture and large windows that looked out onto the lake. Everything was just as it should be, except for one thing. In the middle of the living room, hanging on the wall above the fireplace, was a large oval mirror, framed with intricately carved dark wood. It looked old, very old. Something about it bothered me, but I chose to ignore it and went to bed. On the second night, as the wind gently blew through the trees, I was more relaxed, savoring every minute of that retreat. The night was especially calm, with no sound but the rustling of the leaves. Then I heard it. At first it seemed like a distant noise, a faint sound, like someone walking outside the cabin. Probably just an animal, I thought. But as the sound grew closer, I realized they were footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was walking around the house. I got up and went to the window, peering out. Everything was dark, the only light coming from the moon reflecting on the lake. There was no sign of anyone. I stood there for a moment, listening as the sound faded away. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to believe I was just imagining things. I went back to the couch, trying to calm down. But then I heard it again. This time, the footsteps were coming from inside the house. The sound was unmistakable, like someone walking upstairs. But I knew I was alone. My heart began to race. I walked over to the stairs leading to the second floor, where the bedroom was, and stood at the bottom, listening. There was silence now, but the sense that something was very wrong was undeniable. I decided to go up slowly, each step creaking under my feet, until I reached the top. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint light of the moon coming through the windows. I opened the bedroom door and stepped inside, turning on the light. Nothing. The room was empty, just as I had left it. I sighed in relief, but the unease remained. Something about the house felt like it was watching. On the third night, things got worse. As I was getting ready for bed, the sound of footsteps returned, but this time they were faster, like someone pacing back and forth, right above me. I walked into the hallway, feeling my body tremble. I looked at the mirror above the fireplace, and something in it caught my attention. I swear I saw movement reflected there, like something had passed through the room. I approached the mirror slowly, staring at my reflection. The room was empty, but the reflection seemed off. It was subtle, but the way the shadows moved in the glass didn't feel natural. It was as if something was moving inside the mirror, not in the real world. My stomach twisted when I realized what I was seeing. In the reflection, behind me, a dark figure appeared, tall and thin, with indistinct features, like a faceless human shadow. I froze. I didn't turn around. I just stood there staring at the mirror, waiting for it to disappear. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. With a jolt, I ran out of the room and locked myself in the bedroom, my heart pounding wildly. I spent the rest of the night awake, with all the lights on, waiting for dawn. There were no more sounds, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next morning, I decided to leave the cabin. I packed my things as quickly as I could and left without looking back. Before I left, I tried to send a message to the Airbnb host, explaining what had happened, but I couldn't reach them. Later, when I checked the listing again, the house was no longer available. Every night since then, I've dreamed of that cabin, of the mirror, and of the shadow that watched me. It's still there somewhere, waiting for someone not lucky enough to leave. I was in desperate need of a change of scenery, something to break the routine and help me relax. I found the perfect Airbnb in a small countryside town, an isolated farmhouse that promised tranquility. The photos showed a rustic yet cozy place, surrounded by trees and distant hills. It seemed like the ideal spot for a few days of peace. I arrived in the late afternoon, and the house was exactly as described. It had an old charm with stone walls, large windows, and a porch offering an incredible view of the countryside. The host had left a welcome note and a key on the entry table, saying that if I needed anything, I could just call. The house was mine for the next few days. I spent the first evening settling in and exploring the space. There was a large living room with old furniture and an air of nostalgia, a small but functional kitchen, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. 2 of them were open and ready for use, but the third was locked. I found it odd, but assumed it was just a storage room or a space the owner preferred to keep private. However, something about that locked door bothered me from the start. There was no clear reason why, but it felt out of place, as if the room had been sealed off a long time ago, separate from the rest of the house. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself that I was just tired and being paranoid. On the second night, things started to get strange. I was lying on the couch reading when I heard a sound from upstairs. It was faint, like a soft scratching or creaking, coming from the direction of the locked room. I froze for a moment, listening intently, but the sound disappeared as quickly as it had started. I decided to go upstairs and check. Walking through the dimly lit hallway, I stopped in front of the locked door. I touched the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was cold as ice. For a second, I thought I heard something on the other side, a muffled sound, but I quickly convinced myself it was just the wind or the old house adjusting to the temperature changes. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The house was quiet, but the silence didn't feel natural. It felt heavy, oppressive, as if something was waiting. I woke up several times during the night, feeling like someone was walking upstairs, but each time I got up to check, everything was in the same place, except for the locked door. Always there, unmoving, yet with a weight that seemed almost palpable. On the third night, everything changed. I was eating dinner in the kitchen when I heard it clearly, the sound of a door opening, a long, sharp creak. The sound echoed through the house, coming directly from upstairs. My blood ran cold. It couldn't have been any other door. I had already checked them all, except the locked one. I stood up slowly, my heart racing, trying to process what I had just heard. I walked to the foot of the stairs, hesitant. The upstairs hallway was plunged in darkness. Taking a deep breath, with my phone's flashlight trembling in my hand, I started to climb. At the top of the stairs, the hallway felt colder than the rest of the house. The beam of the flashlight illuminated the old wooden floor, and then I stopped abruptly. The locked door was now ajar. My heart pounded. I knew I hadn't opened that door, and as far as I knew, it had been locked tightly. The air around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. and a strange smell, something sweet and rotten at the same time, drifted from the opening. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. It creaked slowly, revealing what lay beyond. The room was cloaked in shadows. There were old furniture pieces covered in dusty sheets and a large window shrouded by heavy curtains. The air was thick, humid, as if the room hadn't been opened in decades. But what made me step back in fear was what stood in the center of the room, a rocking chair. And even though there was no wind, it was moving, slowly back and forth, as if someone invisible was sitting there, gently rocking. My breath caught in my throat. The floor around the chair was marked, as if something had been dragged back and forth over time. I stepped back, never taking my eyes off the chair. That's when I heard it. A low whisper, incomprehensible, but clearly coming from inside the room. A deep chill ran through me, and I turned to run. But as I did, something in the darkness shifted. In the reflection of the window, I saw a silhouette, tall, motionless, standing in the corner of the room. And those eyes, empty eyes, yet filled with a darkness that seemed to consume everything around it. They were fixed on me. I ran. I stumbled down the stairs, nearly tripping on the steps. Grabbing my things without a second thought, I bolted out the door and into my car. I started the engine and sped away, not daring to look back. In the days that followed, I tried to find the Airbnb listing to warn the host about what had happened, but it seemed to have been removed. The house, suddenly, no longer existed in the records. Even the address seemed wrong. But to this day, I wonder, what was in that room, and why was the door locked? Whatever it was, I know that something remains there, rocking in the chair, waiting for whoever dares to enter. I needed a break, something to pull me out of the chaos of work and give me a few days of peace. I decided to rent an Airbnb in a small mountain town, far enough away for me to disconnect from everything. The place I found seemed perfect, a rustic country house surrounded by trees, with a cozy touch in the photos. The host mentioned that the house was old, but had all the modern comforts. It seemed like just what I was looking for. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange. The house was even more charming than the photos showed, with its stone facade and a small garden at the entrance. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and everything seemed incredibly peaceful. The host had left the key under the front doormat, along with a note containing simple instructions. However, one thing caught my attention. The host mentioned that I could use any room in the house, except for the back room upstairs. Please keep the door to that room closed during your stay, the note said. I found it a little strange, but didn't think much of it. Old houses have their mysteries, and maybe it was just a storage space or a room with the owner's personal belongings. The first night passed quietly. I went to the nearby town to buy groceries, came back to the house, and made a simple dinner. Everything was calm, silent. However, as night began to settle in, the house took on a different atmosphere. The sound of the wind outside grew stronger, and every little creak seemed amplified by the silence. I went to bed early, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. On the second night, things began to get strange. I was in the living room reading a book when I heard a faint creaking sound from upstairs. I figured it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise all the time, right? But as the night wore on, the sound became more distinct, like light, almost imperceptible footsteps pacing down the upstairs hallway. Slowly, my curiosity turned into discomfort. The thought of the locked room at the end of the hallway came back to me. Why did that room have to stay closed? I looked up at the ceiling, listening intently. silence. I decided to go to bed and forget about it. But in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a loud noise. It sounded like a knock. 3 sharp knocks, followed by silence. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, listening closely. The knocking came again. Now it was clear. It was coming from upstairs, near the back room. Unable to control my curiosity, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet. The hallway was dark, except for the faint beam of light from my flashlight. When I reached the end, I stopped in front of the locked door. It was exactly as I had left it. But something was different, a faint sound of scratching from the other side. My mind tried to find a rational explanation, but panic started creeping in. I took a step back, ready to leave, but then I heard a whisper, low, almost inaudible, but unmistakably coming from inside the room. My breath caught in my throat. Was someone in there? A cold wave swept through the hallway, and goosebumps covered my entire body. I knew I should leave, but something held me in place. I reached out for the doorknob, hesitating, as if I knew whatever was on the other side wasn't meant to be seen. When I touched the knob, the scratching stopped. Everything went silent. Not wanting any more answers, I ran down the stairs and went straight to the sofa, locking the door to the room where I was sleeping. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Every small noise made my heart jump. The next morning, I decided to leave the house, but what happened next is what truly haunted me. As I was loading my bags into the car, I felt something watching me. I looked up at the house, and through the upstairs window of the back room, I saw a figure standing still. Someone, or something, was watching me from the other side of the glass. Though that room was supposed to be empty, it was a tall, indistinct shadow with eyes that glowed in a way that seemed wrong, as if they absorbed all the light around them. I lowered my head, avoiding eye contact, got into the car, and left as quickly as I could. When I tried to contact the host later, the number didn't work. I checked the Airbnb listing again, but it had disappeared, as if it never existed. Even now, at home, far from that house, I feel like I'm still being watched, and every now and then, I hear the sound of scratching in the quiet of the night.